After returning from a successful EuroBSDCon in Malta, we're back to get you caught up on all the latest BSD news. We've got stories, interviews, and a special treat for the OpenBSD fans later in the show. All that and more on this week's BSD Now, the place to be, SD.
Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Alan Jude.
And I'm Chris Moore. We've got a good show coming at you guys this week. A lot of news, a lot of wrap-up from EuroBSDCon that we attended this last week.
It's going to take us months to go through all of the things we got at BSDCon.
Yeah. They recorded about 8 or 9 interviews and just lots of good stuff. But let's jump right into what's going on currently this week in BSD. So first item we got, FreeBSD 9.2 is out. They've officially tagged the real one. This is not an RC. Highlights include ZFS trim and LZ4 support. Okay. There's some new VirtIO drivers in there, dtrace, OpenSSH has been updates, and of course the usual assortment of driver updates for you.
Yeah, the VirtIO is a big thing because it's required to boot the guest in Beehive, but also it improves every other virtualization. So that means FreeBSD 9.2 is a faster guest in VMware and VirtualBox and so on, and even Xen. And that was no, that's not in 9.2. Never mind.
Yeah, well, basically, if you're running it virtualized, you need that. Yeah. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, rather than emulating, an old network card that every OS has drivers for, VirtIO actually gets rid of most of the abstraction, right? You're not pretending to make a PCI card. You're just being like, here's the packets and let the virtualizer handle it.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely a huge improvement. Yeah. So I guess this release is going to be supported until 2014, September 30th. Yep. So you got a couple years of updates that are, I guess, a year of updates on that one. Yep. So at this point, it's ready to roll. You can go ahead and run your FreeBSD update command, or you can check it out and do a build world if you're into the source building.
And so we recommend everybody upgrade. It's
definitely
quite a big improvement.
Well, in addition, I know people are going to ask me, so when's PCBSD 9.2 coming? We're building it now. The ISOs will hopefully be going out tonight. We're still uploading packages and whatnot, but hopefully in the next day or so we'll announce it.
Good. So the next headline is we have 4 new releases of NetBSD.
Okay. So what we got going on there?
So they have patches for the older branches. 9.1 and 9.2 both got security fixes, and 9.1 and 9.0 have also got updated.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Very cool. Looks like it's a bunch of security updates and bug fixes.
Yep. But 9.1.2 I think was a big release, and they were like, as soon as they got home from EuroBSDCon, they pumped out a release.
Sure. And of course, later you guys check out the show notes and you can find the links to the full change logs if you're looking for it. Yep. So next up, in FreeBSD land, the old bind utility has finally been replaced with Unbound for DNS resolution. Yep. So anybody who's been a long-time FreeBSD user, you've been dealing with bind for years and years now. And of course, if you pay attention to security updates, you've noticed that, gosh, a lot of those are bind related.
Yeah, I think when I looked, it was 20 out of the last 70 or something like that. Some ridiculously high number.
Yeah, so that'll be hopefully a good reduction in the number of errata and security notices coming down the pike from the FreeBSD project. So it looks like it's being replaced with Unbound and LDNS. And this is in 10 as of September 24th. They yanked bind out, so it's no longer built by default. And then on the 30th, they actually removed it from the tree. Yep. And the new stuff includes an easy script to use it for local DNS. This will be fun to play with, actually, because we're just getting ready to look at 10 builds. We'll have to see what changed, moving to Unbound. Yep. But it looks like OpenBSD also has Unbound in the base, but it's not built by default yet.
Right, but it looks like they might be moving to doing the same thing.
Oh, cool. Okay, it'd be nice to have some commonality between the two.
And, they have the same reason for moving as we did.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they don't like the security updates any more than we do, I'm sure.
Exactly. So cool. The next big story is Dragonfly BSD has posted their future plans on their mailing list. It has some interesting things, including D ports, which is their version of the FreeBSD ports tree, and they're actually switching to using GCC 4.7 as their default compiler.
Okay.
They also have the i915, which is the Intel graphics driver, is going to be included in Dragonfly 3.6. There's also a bunch of work being done on Hammer 2, the updated version of their file system, but that probably won't make it in time for 3.6. So they'll be getting rid of package source, the old NetBSD style package system, and going with D ports, the FreeBSD style. And that's also the one that has some compatibility with Poudriere and package NG. So
that'll make it easy. Yeah, definitely. We can share some code there. So that's interesting. They're going to GCC 4.7. Do Net or Open, as far as you know, have any plans to switch to Clang like FreeBSD is doing?
I think Open had some plans, but I don't know that it's got very far. NetBSD at their developer summit, where we're talking about GPL-free toolchain, I think they're there now. So.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see that move into the other BSDs as well. And get Clang some more exposure. Okay, so next up in the news, FreeBSD ports now get a stack protector. So, and if anyone's been paying attention to the ports tree over the last week, you've noticed there's just been a ton of sweeping commits. A lot of things have been broken and then fixed, and then broken and fixed again, and just a lot of churn going on right now, which is good.
That's a lot of it is progress. Getting as far as they can to improve the new package system without breaking backwards compatibility with the old one. But I know Baptiste is very anxious to get rid of the old package tools once so that they can.
Well, I think he's in a hurry too, because we got 10 now kind of peeking at us from around the corner, and we got to get this stuff done. But the big thing this last week was they added stack protector support. So this is
I guess it's been in the base system since 8, but getting it to work in all the ports, especially when there's 25,000 of them, it took quite a bit of work. But they have that, so they have a call for testing now. So it's like, make sure, let us know what ports don't work so they can be fixed.
Well, so far, we've rebuilt our ports tree since then. I haven't run into anything really not working.
Right,
everything
they have
just looks like normal.
Some flags to mark certain ports as not supporting the stack protection in case they do something really strange.
All right, very cool. So it looks like this works on i386 and AMD 64 for FreeBSD 10, and if you're still on 9, it's on for AMD 64. Only, yeah. So anyway, hopefully this is going to become the default, but as usual, they're going to test it a lot and go through some EXP runs, make sure it doesn't break stuff too badly. So what's up next, Alan?
We have the little wrap-up of EuroBSDCon. There's so much to talk about, but I think people are anxious to see just a little bit of what we did.
Sure. Well, it was definitely a blast. If you guys, if you could ever get out to one in the future, do it. It's well worth it.
Yeah, I guess next year's is going to be in Bulgaria.
In Sofia, Bulgaria. Yeah, that'll be fun. Never been there. Looking forward to it. Although I must say, for Malta, I kind of feel like I spent maybe like 6 or 7 hours in Malta and then 4 days in a conference room because it was just that busy.
Oh yes, there was no free time at all. It was so much to do.
We were up at 8:30, or we actually had to be there at 8:30.
Yeah. I missed the first 10 minutes of the keynote on Sunday because I was having breakfast and I sat with some Netflix guys and we just got talking and then we're like, crap, we gotta go.
But that's a good thing, It was just so busy because there were so many people in attendance. They had 3 tracks. They even cut the talks down to 45 minutes to try and squeeze them all in.
To squeeze more different topics in,
Yeah. But there was something for everyone there. I mean, there was just a lot of good talks.
If you found a slot where you didn't want to see at least 2 of the 4 talks going on at once, I don't know, you're a really boring person. You should be more.
There was just a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Plus the kind of people, the folks who came out. I mean, there was a lot of big names there. We had Theo from OpenBSD. Kirk McKusick was there. Yeah. And, just kind of a who's who of the entire BSD community. Exactly. It was definitely a good conference. I think this may have been the biggest one they've ever done for Euro.
I think it was one short of the record from 2011 or 2010. And then 2 people who happened to be at the hotel saw all the signs for EuroBSDCon and came and registered at the conference. And that put the number over to set the record.
Yeah, I don't know. He may have paid him to do that, but still, it was cool. Yeah, it was definitely a great conference, and the hallway track was particularly good, just because there was a lot of knowledgeable people there. If you wanted to ask anything BSD, you could get five answers.
It's like we were sitting in the first talk, and I was crashing Beehive, and so I just kind of passed my laptop 2 rows over, and the Beehive developer looks at it, and a couple of minutes later, I get emailed a patch, and now Beehive doesn't crash anymore.
That's the kind of stuff that happens at Euro. It's like we had a problem with one of our tools being able to scan really long Wi-Fi SSIDs. And I walk over, and Adrian Chad from the FreeBSD project's there, and he's like, "Oh, let me look at that. Boom, boom, boom. Here it is in the code. There's the bug."
And boom, it's
that. Yeah, it was just good stuff like that.
Or just saw in the corner there was like the ports team and the security team sitting there, and they're working on stuff, and it's like,
lots of good hacking opportunities and just good conversation. So again, if you can, put it on your calendar. I think the website's already up at 2014.EuroBSDCon.org, or is it .com?
.org. And it'll be sometime in September. They're not sure the exact date yet. Usually
so
later. But
they'll be announcing. So definitely, kind of pencil it in. Just if you can make it out there, and if you work in the industry, hopefully you can get your company to send you out, because there's just a lot of good educational stuff there for everybody.
And it's everybody, not just developers, right? I'm just a sysadmin. There's usually a whole track that's just sysadmin stuff, and then there's some developer stuff, some hacker stuff, some corporate stuff, some overview stuff, user stuff.
There's
you do some desktop stuff.
There's something for everyone. Yeah, we did desktop stuff too. I mean, if you're just using BSD, interested developer, I mean, it doesn't matter. You'll find a group you can go to there.
Paul Hunkamp did a talk about this very super large telescope thing. It's a telescope with a 39-meter wide mirror, as opposed to I think the biggest one in the world right now is 8 meters.
Sure.
And there was some specific stuff about using BSD to control the mirror, but in general, it was just really interesting stuff about applying computers to astronomy and replacing really expensive embedded hardware with common off-the-shelf stuff, so that 10, 20 years down the road, it's still replaceable. Whereas, custom-made stuff isn't. How do you get spare parts?
Although I must admit, it's a little tiring to go, because I feel like I come back with a bigger list of stuff that I want to do.
Yes.
Oh man, I need to do that now. I need to try that.
Yeah, so many ideas, and like so many developers say, it kind of recharges your BSD battery. It
really does.
It's like, all this work, it's getting boring, and then new ideas, new things. Or just, hearing from the people that use your software and what it is, what features they want makes a big difference.
Yeah, getting feedback is huge. So while we're on the topic, Alan, why don't you go ahead and show us what neat little thing you got from there?
While I was at the EuroBSDCon, I went by the OpenBSD table and got myself an OpenBSD 4.5 CD set.
Which you mean 5.4?
5.4. Sorry, I was reading it in the reflection.
Right.
So these, I don't think they're actually even on sale yet. So the first people that could get them were at the conference. And so it includes like all of the architectures. You got like i386, VAX, Longsoon, AMD 64, Mac PowerPC, Spark 64. I think there's even an Octeon build in here.
Oh gosh.
You open it. Oh, I also got a bunch of stickers. They have some great stickers, including one that's Theo's head with a speech bubble, and then you write whatever you want.
So you can put words in Theo's mouth?
Or there's a fish holding the there's the IETF standard for the hot spare router protocol. There's always a big thing about that. So you get a whole bunch of different CDs in here. There's also a audio track that always comes with them. They have a song for every release, because they're awesome like that.
They put a lot of work into their releases, guys, because this supports the project.
A little tag here. It's like packaged with care by Mary Sinclair.
So definitely, you guys, this is a good way to support the OpenBSD project. If you use their stuff anywhere, if you just like to throw them a little cash, definitely check out the notes. There's a link to the orders page where I believe you can pre-order this now,
stickers. Right? What are those? What are those penguins doing there?
And you're still opening stuff.
My question is, what are the penguins doing here?
I don't know.
They're dressed funny. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere about the penguins. I'm just not sure what it is.
It's an inside thing, I'm sure.
There's some great ones in here.
great.
So yeah,
very cool. Yeah.
So yeah, that's how the OpenBSD Foundation raises money, is selling these CD sets. So
yep.
I
definitely
highly recommend
consider pre-ordering.
And it comes with this awesome little Pro Police sticker.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that wraps up the main news for this week. But next up, we've actually recorded a lot of interviews while we're out at EuroBSD, and this week we're going to be playing one we did with Dr. Marshall Kirk McCusick from the FreeBSD project.
He's been doing BSD since before it was called BSD.
Yeah, probably before I was born, right? I mean, he's been doing this a long time.
Well, and just some of the things he told us is like, you know that software system you use every day? It's like, I built that and it hasn't changed since before you were born.
Yep. So a lot of good history. He's going to go over a little bit of stuff about UFS, the implementation. So definitely join us for the interview here, and then we'll catch you after the break. Hey folks, this week we're joined with Dr. Marshall Kirk McCusick, FreeBSD developer, longtime contributor, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of interesting things to tell us about FreeBSD, its origins, where it's come from. But first, just give us your own little introduction, how you got started, how this all happened.
Well, I happened to matriculate to the University of California at Berkeley back when dinosaurs and mainframes ruled the earth. That was in the 70s. And as a graduate student, you get assigned to an office with a bunch of other graduate students. And one of the other graduate students in my office was Bill Joy.
Oh, okay.
And Bill Joy, like myself, was working with Professor Susan Graham, working towards a PhD in programming languages. And Bill was one of these people who would just get interested in every little thing that would come along. So he had started out by writing a Pascal, originally interpreter, later compiler. And then Ken Thompson, who was an alumnus of Berkeley, was taking a sabbatical from Bell Labs, and he chose to take a sabbatical and spend a year at Berkeley. And he brought with him this Unix thing that they were working on. And so we had brought that up on the PDP 1170, and we didn't really have things called system administrators in those days. In fact, dumps were sort of a random thing that people would occasionally do if they had just done something important and thought they might want it to be backed up, or I don't know what. Anyway, Ken was sort of the muck-a-muck that was running things, and Bill was sort of his sidekick and would do what we would think of as sysadmin sorts of tasks.
Sure.
But he was learning, how things were going, and so when Ken Thompson left and went back to the labs, Bill more or less took over the role that Ken had. And it was mostly bug fixes that were coming from the labs, but Bill, was going in there and looking at the source code, and he found some things too and started sending it back to them. And then he was annoyed because he didn't really like Bourne Shell, so he wrote C Shell.
Sure.
Now, I find it amusing that someone who was getting a PhD in programming languages could have come up with a syntax as crazy as the C Shell.
Right.
But that's another story.
And they still gave him the diploma, right?
Actually, he never finished his diploma because he left for Sun before he got it. He could have put his name on a piece of paper. They were begging him to get his diploma, but he was just like, next thing.
Yeah.
So at any rate, Bill did C Shell, and then all we had was ED as an editor. So he got a sort of a basic screen editor from this person up in Toronto, and hacked that up to become the VI editor. And pretty soon he had these tools, and he decided, other people could use these things, because he was great, talking to people all the time, and so he'd say, well, just send me a tape and I'll make you a tape. And so the first tape that he put together was just like C Shell and the Pascal compiler and the editor, EXVI. And he needed a name for it, so he just called it the Berkeley Software Distribution. It's kind of like a rock group, their first album is the name of the rock group.
Sure.
And then they do their second album, and what are they going to call it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, he should have called it 1BSD, but he didn't. It was just BSD at the point. So that went on for a while, and the crazy thing was that you think of a distribution, it's like, there's a master for it and you make lots of copies.
Yeah.
But for Bill, it was just like whatever the bits du jour were. So you sent a tape, and whatever the state of the utilities was at that point in time, that was BSD.
There's no versioning.
There was no versioning. So if someone says, "Oh, I have a 1BSD distribution," well, yeah, from what day?
Yeah.
So anyway, that went on for a while, and at some point, it got to the point where people were saying, "Well, I want to get, when are you doing your next distribution?" And he's sort of like, "Well, I don't really have an next distribution, it's just, I've been doing it." So he finally decided, okay, he'll do an actual distribution. So he did what was then 2BSD, just decided to put a 2 in front of it. And that one, he actually made a master tape, because by that time it was complicated enough to find all the bits and pieces and put them together. Because we didn't have a user source at that time. It was just this was in his home directory, and I'd been working on Pascal, so that was in my directory, and it's just, it was sort of, the wild, wild west in those days. It wasn't actually till we did 3BSD. One of the very first things that I did was find all the sources and put them together in one place, and I put a make file there that would actually make it, which was like the predecessor of Make World today.
Sure.
Or Build World. And anyway, you were asking how I got started. Bill was in my office, and Bill had just infectious personality. It's like, "Oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, and it's really easy, just this thing. You could just take that, Oh, sure. How hard can it be?
Right.
Someone once asked me to compare myself to Bill Joy, and I said, there's really nothing that Bill has done that I couldn't do, but what Bill does in a month would take me a year.
Sure.
Because he was just, I'm here, I want to get there. What is the shortest path? Clean code? No. Working code? Yes. Modifiable code? No.
But he got you from point A to point B.
Right.
That's something you could send, right?
Exactly.
There you go.
And B worked. Just don't try and mess with it.
That's right. Don't poke the bear once it's sleeping.
That's right.
Well, cool.
Yeah, so you're kind of famous for doing UFS, but what other stuff have you done? Other than everything.
Well, doing things, it turns out, is something where when you're young, you think, "Oh, I'm going to do UFS, and then it will be done, and I can go on to do the next thing."
No.
And so the next thing I did was we needed to upgrade the VM system. We wanted to be able to do mmap, and the existing VM that we had was just tied to the VAX. Absolutely. I mean, the data structures were the VAX page tables. You could port BSD to any machine provided that you could emulate the VAX page tables. And that's sort of how people did it. So it really wasn't portable, and it didn't really have any notion of sharing other than text. So you could share the text because it was read-only, but the rest you just couldn't share. So we needed a virtual memory system, and in the great Berkeley tradition, why write something yourself when you can steal something better? So we looked around to see what options there were. Sun had taken the original BSD and had overhauled it by putting in a new virtual memory system that supported mmap and had a nice, clean, well-designed model. So that was a clear candidate. And the other one was Carnegie Mellon University had done mock, and of course, as part of mock, they had done a VM system. So those were the two candidates that we had. And we evaluated them, and we decided we really liked the one that Sun had done a little better, because they'd done it in the BSD framework, and so the whole interface was fine, whereas the one in mock had the mock interface, which wasn't what we would have wanted. So we went to Sun. We'd had a very good relationship of them sending stuff back to us, and, working with them. And so we said, we've done lots of bug fixes, but can we just import whole lock, stock, and barrel your VM system? And they're like, well, yeah, that'd be good, because then, you'll be maintaining it, and, it'll make it easier for us, blah, blah, blah. And so, the technical people, of course, were happy with it, and their managers were happy with it, and it made its way up to the VP level, and they were happy with it, and it got up to McNeely, and McNeely thought it seemed like a good idea, we just need to get the legal stuff in place. And it went over to the lawyers, and the lawyers said, well, you'd be giving away your intellectual property. You could be sued by the stockholders for that. That was it. Couldn't do it. And it was a much different era then. I mean, it was way before Open Solaris or anything like that. We're talking early 80s at this point.
Sure.
So, okay, that's not going to work. Let's go with Mach. There was actually some interesting negotiations with CMU, but they eventually signed off on it. And so I and Mike Hibbler at the University of Utah brought it in, and we took away they had all this, it was all message passing because it was a microkernel, but we just plugged it straight in directly into the operating system. It was, at that time, a research vehicle, and because it was a research vehicle, there were all these things like external pagers, so instead of having the kernel dealing with paging, you could have a user process and it would pass out the things and you could do it all out there. That turned out to be a whole lot of extra mechanism in there to do that. So fairly early on in the FreeBSD era, David Greenman and Doug Rabson, I guess, went through and they pulled that out. They pulled out a number of the other things that were in there that were really not useful, and they really just made it lean and mean. They did the page coloring stuff. They did a lot of stuff to really tune it up, but that was another story, which I'll get to. Anyway, so I had done the VM, and then, okay, that's done. So then we have, what's going to be my next project? Oh, well, we need to support multiple file systems, so we'll put in a VFS layer, and we need to have NFS to plug into that, and and again, thankfully, other people were involved, like Rick Macklin, who's still involved to this day with NFS, bless his soul. So working with him, so that, so at this point I have on my plate UFS, the VM, and NFS, and BFS. And
obviously bored to death, right?
Obviously bored to death. And then at some point, some stuff starts coming up with UFS. And I'm like, oh God, well, okay, I can go look at that, and then about that time, all this performance stuff with the VMs coming up, like, and then NFS v3 comes out, and God forbid v4, and pretty soon you realize that you have 3 sets of life work, and there's no possible way you can do all that and have a life. And so the VM stuff I pushed off to David and so on, and Rick Macklin just has totally dealt with NFS, and I've just sort of scrolled myself down on UFS, and just kept beavering away in that general area.
Sure.
Of course, bringing in people like Jeff Roxon, who's did a huge amount of the journaling stuff.
So, give us a little bit of background on the journaling. Did you help implement that with him? And
one of the things is when you get to be an elder statesman, let me put it that way, you can't code like you used to be able to code. So, in my prime, I could do 14-hour days, A little sleep is for the weak, but, you need a little of it here and there. And then you can just crank along. Well, turns out that, at this point, after about 7 or 8 hours, I'm just sort of at the end of my rope. I could keep going, but it wouldn't be productive. On the other hand, I've done enough of it at this point in my life that I can smell a rat hole from 20 paces away. It's like, no, I've been down there, that doesn't work. Let's go try something else. And so you actually are more effective than you are, but you're not like as effective in 8 hours as you used to be in 14. So the trick is to find somebody else that's about 30 that has all this energy.
Sure.
And so Jeff is a prime example of such a candidate. So the fact of the matter is that he did the bulk of the coding. He and I worked through things, and I would send him a data structure, or I would look at his stuff and say, how about this and this, and I don't think that's right, and maybe you should try this or that, and that would be sort of my effort for the day. And then, the next morning when I'd get up, there'd be this email. It's like, well, that idea of yours was crap, but this one seems like it might be good. And how about, maybe this instead of that? And then, by the way, here's another 1,000 lines of code that I'd like you to review. I was like, So, Jeff's the one that did the bulk of that.
Sure.
He did like 90%, and then I just had to do the follow-up 90% that's needed to polish it off. It's mostly looking at bugs, and most of them I can figure out, but every now and then I get one that I just don't get, and so Jeff, help.
Yeah.
What the heck's going on here?
Yeah, so if there was a particular piece of code or feature that was the one you were most proud of, which would be?
Code or feature that I'm most proud of? I'm proud of the fact that UFS is really, really reliable and doesn't kernel file systems.
Yeah, well, that's
the
most important feature of a file system.
It is. I like, people that like to work in operating systems, almost anything other than the file system, the worst that happens is the blue screen of death equivalent, and they have to reboot. People don't like that, but Microsoft has conditioned them to having that 2 or 3 times a day as an acceptable practice, and so, when it only does it like once a week, that's pretty good as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
So, they tolerate that. They accept it. That's fine. But after a crash, if they come up and their file system is kernel, they, and they have to go use their possibly non-existent dump tapes, and even if they do have them, it's hours of effort. You get to do that like once or twice, and then you get a reputation for having an unreliable file system. So my classic example of this is the Riser file system, right? I mean, that file system was unstable in the sense of kernelling file systems for several years. And, after that, he got it fixed, and it really was a stable file system, but it just had this reputation of being an unstable file system.
Sure.
And, you ask people, Riser, oh no, that kernel system. Hasn't done that in a decade, guys. Well, it's too bad. That's the rep you got.
Yeah.
So you have to be incredibly conservative. So the approach that I took, which I would like to say that I designed in advance, but which is actually, I did it and it turned out to be a good design, is that the file system is divided into policy and implementation. So the implementation is the thing that actually goes out and gets the bit maps, and sets the bits, and puts it back, and keeps all that stuff in sync in a coherent fashion. And then the policy is the thing that gets to say, oh, put it here, put it there, whatever.
Sure.
You can write any harebrained policy you want, and ultimately the implementation will just make sure that something reasonable happens. So the policy routine picks a block that it wants, and it asks the implementation, I want this block, I want that inode. And if it's available, it gets it. And if it's not available, the implementation returns the thing that's closest to what it asked for. So you can have a policy which is, I want block 1. That's the whole policy. I just want block 1 for everything. And you'll just get this big, gloppy tarball mess, which looks sort of like the old file system. But, it'll work, it won't get kerneled, etc. So I wrote the implementation in 1982. I have not changed one line of the implementation since then. I got that working, and it just is what it is. Everything since then is just changes to policy. And, all the journaling is policy, soft updates is policy, layout policies have changed, where things get put over the years based on technology. Implementation doesn't change. That's why it stays stable. A couple years ago, there was something where I was thinking, I could change the implementation a little bit and it would make this policy work better. And so I tried to do that, and I sent off to Peter Holm to test. He does a lot of the testing for us, and he can brutalize anything. And he sends it back to me. He says it kerneled the file system. I'm like, what was I thinking? I put that right back, just threw that code away to change the implementation. It's like, I knew I shouldn't do this, and I've just been reminded why I shouldn't do this.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, though. I had no idea it stayed the same since, was it 82, you said?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, if you happen to have a disk that you can still read that has a 1982 file system on it, it will still work. Read and write.
That is impressive. Well, cool. So what are you currently working on these days?
At the moment, George Neville Neal, Robert Watson, and I are working on the 4th edition of the design and implementation of the EuroBSD book.
Oh, okay.
With a goal of having a first draft done by the end of this year. I'm sorry. And if assuming that we can meet that goal, we should have it out by the middle of next year. And, I think it's an aggressive goal. We probably aren't going to get that exactly, but we'll have it out next year. Probably
very cool.
Late summer.
Yes, that's a great book. I have a copy of one on my shelf at the house.
Got it signed by all the authors?
No, I don't. Actually,
Well,
I should bring it out to one of these conferences. I know where to find you guys.
Yeah. EuroBSD for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'll bring it out this next March.
Yeah.
So, that'll be great. Okay. Well, any other questions you want to ask, Alan? But this was fantastic, though. Thank you so much.
You know, the problem is you ask me one question, I'll fill your whole
Yeah,
half an hour in one answer.
No, this was
Those
fantastic.
are the best interviews.
Those are the best interviews, though, because you're just telling us how it went. And most people don't know this. I didn't even know most of the history of how this got started. So this is very helpful.
This is gold.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys watching with us, and join us again next week.
Okay, folks, we got a cool tutorial coming for you today. First of all, if you've ever built ports on any BSD system, I mean, you know it takes a while. There's a lot of compiling time, especially if you're doing something big like Firefox, OpenOffice, and all the associated dependencies. But there's a lot of factors involved with those times, but the most important one is how fast the CPU of the system is. There's a couple things we can do to go ahead and speed up all these compile those. For FreeBSD, this may include switching to Clang LLVM instead of GCC, although this is going to be for FreeBSD that's older than 10. In 10, they've switched to Clang LLVM for the default. Another thing you can do is build ports in RAM instead of being bound by your disk I/O. This can be very helpful. And then the last thing, which we're going to take a look at today, is using Ccache to save time on things that you've already compiled previously. And setting it up is actually pretty easy. So, Alan, go ahead and take it away. Let's see exactly how we get this running.
And another thing where this makes a big difference is if you're using Poudre and building multiple package sets. So if you're building the same port with a couple of different options, using a cache makes a huge difference there.
Oh, definitely.
So the first thing we got to do is install Ccache. So it's under the development tools, and we'll just quickly install that. And so what this does is basically swap some stuff around so that when you compile stuff, it uses Ccache as kind of a wrapper around the regular.
Yeah. It intercepts calls to your regular compiler and does its caching algorithms.
So then in etc.make.conf, we're going to add a couple things. So this is a 9.2 system, so we're going to make it use Clang to compile anyway, instead of the base GCC. And we're going to set the work prefix, or work directory prefix. So normally when you compile something in ports, it goes to user local, or user ports, devel, Ccache, and then makes a directory actually called work, and then does all those files in there. In this case, we're going to make the prefix for that actually be /RAM, which will be a RAM disk we'll create in a second here. And that way, all the temporary files go to RAM instead of disks, so that it's faster. And then we can enable Ccache by putting with Ccache build equals yes. And this will make the ports use Ccache.
Very nice.
So next, we need to create the RAM disk. So we'll make a directory called /RAM. And then if we edit our FS tab, we can say mounting from device none, because this is a RAM disk, there's no block device backing it. We'll set the mount point to /RAM. The file system type will be TMPFS, because that'll make it in RAM. And then in addition to the regular options, we also have to set a size. So I did mine as 1 gigabyte, because this virtual machine only has 2 gigs, but depending on how much RAM you have, you can use various amounts of RAM for your temporary file system. And then we can mount it. And now if we look, we have an empty file system on /RAM.
Yay.
So now, if we go and compile something, like PHP 5.4, it'll do the compile like normal, except for it'll take less time. I've already done this once earlier, and so you'll see that it'll compile really, really fast because of that.
Yeah, I think Ccache is pretty cool.
When I did the compiles, I did it a couple times to warm everything up, but when I've done it once without Ccache, the compile time was over 2 minutes. When I did it with Ccache, it was 31 seconds.
Oh, huge difference, yeah. When you start calculating times 25,000 ports, I mean, you'll definitely see yourself saving a lot of time.
Well, especially with things like PHP, where you're actually building a bunch of these subports that are just modules, and it has to compile certain parts over and over and over again. So
that's
as
just a waste of cycles.
Yeah, and so now you can see we've completed our compile, and it's done. And then we can, if you do Ccache minus S, it'll print out some stats. So we can see that, we got 1,000 cache hits and only 930 misses, and, all the times where it actually sped things up. And so far, it's only using 44 megabytes in the cache directory. And that's, I compiled Perl, libxml, PHP, all the dependencies of PHP in addition. So it makes a big difference.
Definitely. And does implementing this with Poudre, is there anything else you're going to have to set up, or does it just kind of work out of box?
It's pretty much the same. You just have to put those make.conf variables in the special make.conf for Poudre. And then, so especially if you're compiling the same package multiple times with different options for different sets or something, which I happen to do a lot, it makes a big difference.
Definitely.
Or, if you're just compiling everything on a constant basis, right? Like you have to for your setup.
We do a lot of this. Well, a good example is if you're somebody who's still doing a lot of compiling, say you're rolling a new Firefox every 4 days, or Chrome or something, one of those packages that changes a lot. Odds are very little of the code's actually changed between releases, so you can reduce a lot of your build time.
Yep, same for building the entire package tree with Poudre. It only recompiles things when it's needed, but again, most of it's probably not changed. And so with that, they can probably save even more time off the compiles that have gotten a lot faster since Poudre in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely very helpful. Okay, folks, next up, the news roundup. We're going to rapid fire a bunch of news items at you, a couple things that have changed this last week, and then we'll wrap up the show. So first up, what we got going on, Alan?
And we got the list of speakers for VBSDCon.
Okay.
It's been posted extra, but in case you weren't already aware, we have David Chisnell from the FreeBSD core team is talking about the migration from GCC to LLVM and Clang. Luigi Rizzo from FreeBSD is talking about the evolution of the NetMap framework, which is really high-speed networking stuff. Baptiste Drasson, who we actually interviewed in EuroBSDCon, we'll have that interview for you sometime in the next couple of weeks. He's talking about package NG and probably his wish list of things he would like to improve. Henning Brouwer and Rick Floater from OpenBSD are talking about doing packet inspection with OpenBSD and PF. We interviewed Henning while we were there as well, so we'll have that interview eventually as well. Scott Long is actually, for once, doing a talk not about Netflix, but actually dispelling the stigma of the .0 release. If those of you remember, Scott Long was release engineer for FreeBSD for 5 or 6 years, I think, so he knows all about this. So that'll be a really interesting talk. Our guest from last week, Devin Teskey, will be giving a talk, a comprehensive look at BSD config, which I thought was cool. And then I started digging into BSD config as part of work Devin Teskey and I are doing on improving BSD install. And now I'm just flabbergasted with how amazing it is.
Cool.
And also totally surprised with how much you can do just with shell script. It's just amazing. And it reminds me, at the Dev Summit for EuroBSDCon, there was a talk. I think the same talk might have been at BSDCan as well.
Daichi.
Daichi Goto was talking about these Japanese companies who process 10 billion lines of plain text with shell script on a scale so much faster than distributed systems like Hadoop that it kind of makes all of the Web 2.0 NoSQL stuff look like, oh, you mean it was faster if we had just stuck with flat text files and Unix command line tools?
And that makes me happy. I'm a big fan of shell.
Exactly. And then there's this other guy I've never heard of speaking. His name is Chris Moore.
Oh gosh, that. We'll be giving a talk out there at VBSDCon as well. It'll be the same one we did at Euro, so if you couldn't make it to Euro, come on out and join us.
And John Hickson is also giving one about FreeNAS plugins, which I know he submitted
cool
for EuroBSDCon, but there were 75 submissions, and even after stretching it as much as they could only make 42 slots.
Sure. Well, so that'll be an interesting one to kind of catch up on what's going on in FreeNAS land.
Yes, and also the FreeBSD certification group will be running the exam on the Saturday. So if you would like to get your BSD associate certificate, you should do that. I did it, and you should try to beat my score.
Hey, there you go. Very cool. Well, next up, we have Zen and PVHVM was added to generic on FreeBSD.
Yes.
So now it's possible to run FreeBSD 10 under Zen with the generic kernel.
Yes, you don't need a custom kernel. This makes a huge difference for Amazon EC2 as well. And sometime in the future, Colin Percival has also promised to come on and talk to us about that.
That'll be cool.
But
and
this is
in addition,
for using a Zen guest on anything, not just Amazon. It means that you get it's all in generic, so you can just use FreeBSD update and install off the regular CD. You don't have to have all the special bits you used to have.
Yeah, definitely. That'll make it easy. No more having to manually compile and run your own kernel config for that. Okay, next up here, we got Dragonfly AMD KMS port. So Dragonfly users started porting the new AMD KMS drivers from FreeBSD. And it's still a work in progress, so he's asking for any help from the community. So if you're a guy who's interested in graphics support, definitely get in touch with him.
Indeed. Speaking of graphics support, NetBSD has started work on the NVIDIA drivers.
Oh, okay.
Apparently these are completely open source ones and not the binary blob that FreeBSD uses from NVIDIA. So far it only supports the GeForce 2 MX, which I'm guessing is what some developer has in his Mac.
Yeah, that's
it says specifically tested on the Mac PowerPC only, so I'm guessing this is the card that comes in a slightly older Macs. So for a bunch of people using that, that might be quite interesting for them.
very cool. So looks like it doesn't have any acceleration yet. So this is a brand new implementation.
Yes.
It's not copying anything from Linux,
appears to be brand new.
Okay, very cool. Next up, FreeBSD.
This was some interesting thing I found. It was being talked about in the Documenters chat room earlier yesterday, or this morning even. We'd noticed that FreeBSD has slowly been working its way up the popularity list. Over the last 12 months, the average ranking for FreeBSD has been 18th, and then it slowly crept up, and 15, and then 12. And now on
this is on DistroWatch, by the way.
And now in the 1 month average, FreeBSD has broken the top 10. We are now and including surpassing CentOS, Crunchbang, Puppy Linux, Slackware, etc.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yes.
And that's the wrap up for the rapid fire news this week, guys.
Yep.
Next up, we got some feedback and questions from you, the audience. So let's go ahead and get started with that. What's the first one here, Alan?
Yes. So Charlie wrote in with a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
So he was asking...
looks like PCBSD questions from a newbie.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds pretty descriptive. Several questions. Should I start off using FreeBSD 9.2 or go with PCBSD 9.2? Well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you just want to get up and running at least amount of hassle, definitely go the PCBSD route because we're going to handle sound detection, your XOR setup, all that out of box.
Well, even I think a lot of FreeBSD developers are kind of moving towards PCBSD just because it's all done for you.
It's done for you. Would just save you a lot of time. You're not going to have to look up a manual on how to set up boot environments or how to configure this specific piece of software. It should just work out of box. And the cool thing is, once it's set up, you dig into the command prompt. It is FreeBSD. So if you want to start tweaking packages and install this or that from the repo, I mean, go for it. There's pretty much no difference at that point.
It's the same thing underneath, so it doesn't matter where you start. Chris even has an interesting page on his wiki about just what it takes to convert a FreeBSD install into PCBSD.
Sure.
And all it is installing the PCBSD Metaport, right?
Yeah. There's basically a couple packages you can install. And the cool thing is I just committed those to the FreeBSD ports tree this last week. So if you want to do a source build, you can even do that now and end up with a PCBSD system on your traditionally installed FreeBSD. Second thing he asked, though, is some problems with the NVIDIA Optimus card, and does PCBSD support these? So you'll have to give it a shot on 9.2. There's been some work with the Intel driver on there, so you might be able to work on the Intel side. But honestly, the best luck we have is if you can go into your BIOS and set it to discrete mode and just run it in NVIDIA.
Yeah,
that's what I do on my laptop.
That's what I do on my laptop as well.
Yeah, that just seems to work better. I mean, no offense to the open source drivers, but the NVIDIA binary driver just does a really good job.
Well, at the core, it's the same one as the one on Windows. And that's why
it is.
The performance is equivalent or better on FreeBSD because it's the same one.
Yeah, it'll even do like SLI for you, and they have this nifty little NVIDIA settings utility. So I use that when I go do presentations. I can just fire that up. Oh, detected my new projector. Let me go and extend my screen to it, and it's very Windows-ish for lack of a better. It just works. So if you can switch over to discrete mode, highly recommend you do that. That's going to be the most bang for your buck there. Let's see here. Next up, he had some questions about Bluetooth. So with 9.1, we have a Bluetooth. If you install PCBSD, we have a Bluetooth manager, which will help you get it paired. You may still have to do some stuff with the command prompt to figure out where you're going to send sound, to which device and whatnot. Right. But at least we'll handle the tricky parts of the pairing for you. And he was curious about upgrading from 9.1 to 9.2. So we've had, actually, it's a good thing you mentioned that. We've had several people ask me, where's the 9.2 updates? Well, we haven't really issued our 9.2 release yet. Everything up to this has been release candidates. We're in the process of uploading 9.2s tonight, so we'll probably be announcing them in the next day or two, and then we'll go ahead and kick the update manager so it'll start showing the upgrade from 9.1 to 9.2 being available.
Awesome. Yep. So what about the people that are on the release candidates? That will just be the same as well?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, we kind of changed a little bit of how we do it. If you're on a release candidate, it already technically says you're on 9.2 release. Yeah. And we do that so that you don't have to do a complete reinstall of your world every time. Because honestly, the difference between RC1 to RC4 and then releases...
like 3 bug fixes.
Yeah, just a couple files, right? Yeah. So by doing that, FreeBSD Update's able just to grab the couple files that change, and you don't have to do a reinstall, and it's just a lot simpler.
Just an update instead of an upgrade.
And speaking of which, that's what we're going to start doing is kind of a little tidbit of what's upcoming. Once 9.2 is out in the next couple of days, we're going to take a couple weeks. I got a few things to work on, but then we're going to do our 10 stable build here pretty quick. And in addition, when they branch off to 11 current, we'll start doing a build of that. And we're going to be running the FreeBSD update service for that as well. So you'll be able to jump onto 10 stable or 11 current and run that for the foreseeable future and just get binary updates every couple weeks or once a month. I'm still playing with the timing on how often we'll do it to avoid the most churn, but it's definitely going to be possible now. We're going to try and keep you on as cutting or bleeding edge as you want, so we'll give you the options.
Awesome.
Okay. So what's up for the next question?
If I find the right shot.
What?
Jel Alexander writes in and asks, he says, I use FreeBSD for all my headless stuff at home. I've been using it since around 5. A lot of the topics are quite above my skill level, but I still find the talks and discussion on the show interesting. So he says, one of the things I most look forward to is seeing more of the guides. The first one about S-Tunnel was just the kind of thing that goes right to his skill level, where he said Prettier was great, but it's not really something that he does at home.
Sure.
Another thing he would like to see would be some tips and tricks. The little things that just make your life easier.
Little things you can tweak out.
Yeah. There's so many of them. Actually, our mutual friend Drew Levine actually wrote a book called BSD Tricks. What is it called?
Hacks?
BSD Hacks, yes. BSD Hacks. I have a hard copy of it somewhere in my house. It was actually what passed for the textbook for my Unix security course. And that's where I learned all kinds of cool stuff. One of the reasons I use the shell that I do, TCSH, is there's a little hack in there that enables typo correction. And I'm addicted to it.
Well, that's definitely helpful.
And there's lots of little things in there, just little things you can do. And the great part about, the little shell things is that, even though the book's a bit old now, all that stuff still applies.
Sure. Yeah, most of that stuff doesn't go stale very quick.
Exactly.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah, we can do more tips and tricks as well for you. Yeah. I mean, one, just like the previous questioner said, a good tip would be if you're going to go ahead and set up the desktop, just use our media for PCBSD. It will just save you time, because we do a lot of those tips and tricks where we fix bugs with suspend and resume where your mouse doesn't get restarted properly, or we restart the Wi-Fi for you. So if you sleep in one location, wake up elsewhere. Yeah, and that's all stuff it's not hard to do, but if you're going to run FreeBSD native or vanilla FreeBSD, you're just going to have to do it all by hand, and we've just tried to take a little bit of the pain out of it for you.
Yep. So next guy, Stefan writes in, and he says, he loves the show so far, and he thought the S-Tunnel tutorial was really good. So his question is, he runs a lot of e-commerce sites using Magento, which is this giant PHP app. And he said they kind of settled on a stack, Nginx, PHP, FPM, APC, Varnish, etc. And they've used Ubuntu 64-bit exclusively until now because it had more up-to-date packages than CentOS. And he's wondering, do we think you did get a big performance gain from switching to FreeBSD? And I think in a couple of ways you could. The biggest one is just the file system. Whether it's UFS or ZFS, they just tend to be better. And things you can do with like jails, putting the PHP FPMs in a jail. There's no real performance impact there, but just the extra containerization and stuff makes it so much easier. The threading, I think, on FreeBSD scales better. And I think the biggest difference for me is the sysutls are much easier to tune, and they're more descriptive and more documented. But the tools for looking at your performance, like top, and gstat and iostat and all of those, they're just so much more detailed on FreeBSD. When the odd time I have to use the top utility on Linux, I'm like, oh, I forget how to do that. I look up the man page, it's like, oh, it can't do that.
Doesn't have that flag.
The top for Linux has almost no flags. And the other thing I noticed is if you're like pressing spacebar to refresh top, all of a sudden Linux top is using 100% of your CPU because you're refreshing too hard. Whereas the FreeBSD top, because it's not crawling the /proc virtual file system, it's just much faster. But I think the biggest one is GSAT. Being able to look at my disks and see how many IOPS are going on, reads, write, how saturated the disk is, what the average delay for each read and write is, and it just gives you so much more visibility on what's actually happening so that you can tune around whatever your performance bottleneck happens to be.
Well, and then if he ends up using ZFS too, and he needs to set up a RAID, being able to monitor, oh, these drives are good, this one's going bad. It's just nice having all those tools right in the base.
And the checksums and things like that. Also, Varnish and Nginx, which he's using, both have the ability to take advantage of special features in FreeBSD, like accept filters and the send file and all those types of things.
Well, send files how Netflix is pushing so many bits on their FreeBSD boxes.
Exactly. And, Igor, the guy that invented Nginx, he uses FreeBSD even as his desktop. In our interview, I guess he uses the Mac mostly as his desktop now, but all of his servers are FreeBSD. Nginx is basically developed for FreeBSD and then ported to Linux. And the same thing goes for Varnish. It was built by a FreeBSD developer to run on FreeBSD and take advantage of the power of FreeBSD, and then, extended to work on Linux as well. And yeah, in his email here, Stefan's talking about tuning the TCP backlog. The listen depth is very easy to tune on FreeBSD. And part of it is also that the default is unlimited because FreeBSD can handle that, whereas Linux limits it by default because they can't handle the same level of stuff. Even VeriSign, which runs some of the root servers for .com and so on, they mostly try to use FreeBSD because they can handle millions of concurrent connections or packets without breaking down.
That's why they're hosting VBSDCon in a couple of weeks. It's kind of their way of giving back to the community.
So yeah, I don't know that I have a guide I could just point you to, but the things I've done with FreeBSD, moving people off of Linux, the performance difference has always been very big.
Yeah, I guess the best thing you can do is just kind of set up your test case and just benchmark it, see what your use case, how it comes out.
Well, we had somebody write in 2 or 3 weeks ago saying that they got away with 25% fewer virtual machines by using FreeBSD instead of CentOS. So the last question is from Chandra.
This one's for you.
So they said that they happened to watch my BSDCon 2013 presentation, and they said it's inspired them to look at FreeBSD for doing their own CDN distribution in 3 countries for some internal purposes. This is like me, he doesn't want to use the cloud because virtual machines aren't always that great, and there's other problems, and you never know what's going to happen. And it kind of reminds me of something PHK said in an interview we did with him, which we'll also give to you guys later on. With jails, it's like one of those two-way mirrors or one-way mirrors you see, on like a cop show. You, as the system administrator on the host, can look into the virtual machine, or in this case the jail, and see what's happening. But the jail can't tell that you're looking in on them. Whereas with a virtual machine, like full virtualization, like a hypervisor, like VMware or VirtualBox or whatever, in order to look inside that machine, you have to log in at the console or over SSH. And so,
it has to actually be booted.
Yeah, it has to be booted. It has to be running, and you have to log into it or whatever. And that means that anybody else inside of it can actually see that and knows that they're being looked at. Whereas with the jail, they don't.
He was talking about how they use jails for honeypots, where they'll let hackers get in, and then not knowing there's somebody actually monitoring you from outside the jail to see what you're doing. But it's definitely cool to be able to shut it down and then still get in and manipulate the files and work on it and then bring it back up when it's ready to roll.
So we asked, it says currently they're mostly running Linux like CentOS and Debian with some ZFS on Linux, and they want to switch over to FreeBSD. If you're using Puppet, which is what my talk was about, most of your config in Puppet wouldn't have to change, right? Just the same way you install packages, you just change the provider from, yum or apt over to package ng, and installing packages works the same way.
Sure.
Puppet is purposely trying to abstract most of that stuff. So there's FreeBSD versions of the providers for almost everything. And if there isn't, they're fairly trivial to write most times. And there are a bunch of unofficial ones on the Puppet website with various bits of FreeBSD.
I assume there's some for like FreeBSD update and such.
Yep. There was a nice one for configuring port snap to run every night. Lots of cool stuff. Although I'd like to rewrite a whole bunch of those with Devin Teskey's sysrc now. There's some crazy things you do with shell to safely configure rc.conf from a shell, but doing it with sysrc, just looking at this command line syntax, it was like it was designed to be used by Puppet. And so I'm really interested in looking at that.
Oh, cool. Okay, guys, that wraps up the feedback and questions for this week. So just some parting thoughts here. Of course, the tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. So if you want to go ahead and refer back to the document we used for the tutorial.
It's a little easier to follow along looking at the text.
Yeah, copy and paste the commands, etc. Of course, send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, pretty much anything to feedback at bsdnow.tv. That's the preferred method of getting a hold of us. We don't necessarily check YouTube comments, JB, Reddit. So if you want us to see it, go ahead and send it via email, or if you'd like to tweet it, we do try and monitor that as well.
And don't forget that you can always watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 1800 UTC.
So thanks you guys for watching this week and joining us on the show, and looking forward to having you guys again back next week.
Yes, and thanks everybody that joined us in the chat room as well.